Good morning.
Good morning.
So we are back in Mark chapter 2. We will be starting with verse 18, finishing with 22, as we continue on through the 5 controversy stories. And while you turn there, I will own the fact that, and I'll explain this more, I think I have misangled a little bit of this, but we will correct that as we go. The controversies that arise here are not just 5 little doctrinal things, like this week we're looking at the fasting question. It is more so these doctrinal things come from the fact of who Jesus is. So while Jesus is answering, yes, doctrinal questions, why do you hang out with those people? Why do you not fast? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? The larger context is, we don't like who you are, and we're going to yell at you for it. So that's more the controversy end of it. I just like that Jesus is a little snickety sometimes. Because sometimes I need a little snickety. Because, sarcasm is a great teaching tool for me. Sometimes hate is a love language. It's not one that I would recommend that we start taking up, but it does exist. It's not in the 5 love language guy's book. I forget his name. Isn't it like Chapman? Yeah, okay, my wife says it is. That's all I need. But yeah, sarcasm and hatred and food. Food's not in there either. I think it's under gifts, but food and hate are love language that the guys I work with speak. So I prefer food over hate, but whatever. But Mark chapter 2, verse 18, because this is the important thing. John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and they came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "While the bridegroom is with them, the attendants of the bride cannot fast, can they? So long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the patch pulls away from it, and the new from the old, and a worse tear results. No one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and the skins as well. But one puts new wine into fresh wineskins." Father God, we thank you that you are the group. We thank you that you are the one who redeems us and that we are your bride. Father God, I would ask that you would help us to realize that with you there really is joy like a fountain, peace like a river, and love like an ocean. God, help us to be your representatives well in this world. Help us to realize that we find our place in you. Help us to realize that you are the one who makes things right. And in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I think that this question is actually born out of a good place. Sometimes when we see people questioning Jesus, we can tell that Jesus has just run roughshod over them and they're annoyed at him, so they're attempting to trap him. Sometimes it is out of sheer jealousy. But I think this is one of those in which people who meant well, who actually were trying to figure it out, who are genuinely trying to get it right. Mark really doesn't blast this question or the people asking it in any way in which he writes it. Now there's a corrective that Jesus gives, but that is an answer to a legitimate question. Jesus answers legitimate questions. And that's a good thing, because I got lots of questions. But Jesus doesn't come at these people hard, which is why I think that this is a legitimate question. If you'll notice throughout all of the Gospels, when people who have legitimate concerns that they don't understand something come to Jesus and say, "So we've heard, but you say, what?" Then Jesus is very gentle with those people. But when you get people who are just asking questions to hear themselves talk, or they're just snots, that's a theological term, don't get lost with it, who are just trolling Jesus, to use a modern word, Jesus does not really answer them nearly anywhere at all gently. Like he gets kind of perspicuity.
Nickety.
That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. Like he gets kind of short. And I like the fact that there is, if you have a legitimate concern, Jesus is a legitimate place to bring it. But if you're just going to be a little snot 2-year-old, maybe you should check that at the door. But this question about fasting arises because it was a normal cultural thing for the Jews. It would almost be as though you went to the Chiefs game and you said, "Why are you not wearing red?" Right? There was the Royal, I didn't think about this one. There was when the Royals were in the World Series a while back, there was the guy who wore like the Florida Marlins. I should learn to talk if I'm going to do this for a living, right? Jersey, and everybody was like, "What is this freak doing?" Okay? He ended up being a very nice guy. It's just his thing. But it's that kind of thing. So when they ask this question, understand that almost to a T, the scribes, if you were religious at all and you were dedicated to Judaism, you fasted 2 times a week. You fasted on Monday and you fasted on Thursday. I'm sure there's a good reason why it was Monday and Thursday, but at the current point in time, I'm not sure that I can at all explain it succinctly or that I fully understand, because there are a couple of different explanations for that, and I'm not sure which one's fully right. But they fasted 2 times a day, or two times a day, 2 times a week. Again, if I'm going to do this, I should do this well. Anyway, so they would, on Mondays and Thursdays, which means that this story probably takes place on a Monday or a Thursday. Because other festival things that would have required fasting would have been observed by Jesus. There is one of the fast, or one of the festivals, and only one, that a fast is actually required for. What these people are actually commemorating in their fasting is the destruction of Jerusalem and some other things along those lines. So they are lamenting and reminding themselves that they are in a broken world. They are reminding themselves that they are waiting for the Messiah to fix all of the mess that is their world. So this is why Jesus answers them the way he answers them. And we're going to look much more in depth at Jesus' answer as we go, because there's a lot of things that have borne out of his answer incorrectly. And they're pet peeves of mine because I am a non-unhitcher. I'll explain that in just a little bit as we get there. But it is not a statement about the Old Testament that Jesus is making here. But what he is getting at is as these guys come to him and they say, "Look, we understand that pious religious people fast. But you have groups that don't. Your disciples don't fast, Jesus. Everybody else fasts. Everybody else who believes in this Judaism thing does. Why is it that you tell your people not to?" And by implication, what they're saying is, why don't you fast, Jesus? If you're so holy and you're so pious, why are you not doing this basic thing? Now, if I were to take a poll, I bet most of us do not fast twice a week. It's not a part of our thing. And I could probably count the number of times that I've fasted on these 2 hands. And I may not need both of them. To be really honest with you, I could probably use this hand. But in the course of things, this was a normal part of Judaism. This would be about the equivalent as if I walked up to somebody and I said, "Okay, look, everybody else prays. Why do you think you don't need to pray?" Right? And then we would go, "Oh, yeah, that's but we kind of have this fasting thing where we only do it when it's really dire." And that's fine. It is only commanded once in a communal kind of a sense. It's not that it's unbiblical to do it, but we get fasting really wrong. And sometime we'll talk about what fasting is and isn't. It's not a dietary program, okay? I ran across a book that was like Fasting Your Way to Health. No. The book is weird. Just no. Now, I'm not making a statement about intermittent fasting. and that's a different beast. But fasting in this way, no. And this was about, we live in a broken world that is commemorated most poignantly for them that Jerusalem fell. The Babylonians carted them off, and their world has never been quite the same since then. They have always been under, and they've been under the Romans after that. So it's never been right. We're still waiting for God to make this right, and we're all lamenting this fact, and you seem like you're having a party over there, Jesus. So maybe you don't get how bad this is. What's your justification for not being broken like the rest of us? And that's the beauty. We know what his answer is. This is what I like about the controversy is not just about, for them it's why is it that you're not doing this basic religious thing? But Jesus is going, because I'm the answer. This is the time for us to celebrate. You've been waiting for this day. I'm here. Now that's not the exact, but that's what he's going to get at here. And just like in some of these older, they were like, well, no, wait a minute. You're going to have a meal with tax collectors? I don't know that God's grace goes that far. And Jesus says, I do because I'm God, right? It's a question of identity. Jesus, can you really say God's grace goes that far? And he says, well, since I'm God, yes. Absolutely. This is the point. And it's not surprising that does God's grace reach this kind of broken person, and then fasting, lamenting over brokenness, are side by side. The controversy is, does God's grace go that far? And Jesus says, sure looks like it because I'm having the meal. And it's that sort of a thing. And then over here, before that even, we had can you forgive sins? And Jesus says, if you understood that I'm God, because their problem is only God forgives sins. I mean, we're fine with you healing people. By all means, we've got a whole hospital, Jesus. Go walk the halls. And Jesus does. I mean, they don't actually have a hospital, but you understand, he heals their whole city. They love it. It's great. But wait, you're claiming you can forgive sins. You understand that's a God-only thing. And Jesus says, you're absolutely right. And they all go, whoa. Right? It's the controversy of who Jesus is that causes them to have controversies. And that's still true today. When we make Jesus a nice guy, we make him essentially the religious Bob Ross, people are okay with that. I love Bob Ross. That's why I chose him. Okay, Bob is great. That's what we call him in our house, thanks to the small one. We love Bob. And Happy Little Trees, I love it. When I get sad, I just start quoting Bob, and then I just laugh, and my wife just rolls her eyes. Pray for my wife, because this is who she married. This show is that. But in the course of things, I love you too. Thanks. But in the course of things, like this is the controversy. Is we're good with him being a nice guy. We're good with him being a pretty decent teacher. But when he is the one way to God and the authority, I don't know about that. Right? So it's still the controversy is always about who is he? Who do you say that I am? That's a question that's going to get asked in a little while. That's the problem. When we get to the nitty-gritty of the identity of Jesus and thus our own identity, that's where people draw the line of what we like and what we don't like. And here, their problem is they don't understand that Jesus is the solution to the brokenness. Because if I'm looking at, I need to solve my problem, and I'm talking to the answer of my problem, I'm not nearly as bummed. Right? Some of you know that I've had an issue the last couple of weeks. I was talking to the HR lady. She is the solution to my issue. She solved my issue. I don't go, oh, bummer. Now when I pass her in the hallway, we high five. Not really, because they don't let me inside. I don't know why. But, I think well of her. I don't go and lament of, oh, we solved my problem. I'm so sad that now my paycheck is right. That's not an expression that I had. I had the expression of, hey, babe, we don't have to be mad at them anymore. They fixed it. Okay? That was And they owned it. You know, like, for their credit, okay, we identified the problem and we kind of solved it. To the best of the ability, don't think less of the institution. It's important to me. But in the course of things, like, this is the problem, is these disciples who are coming to Jesus, they're not his disciples, but they're coming to Jesus and they're saying, look, we live in a broken world. Why does this not affect you? And the answer is it affects him greatly. Because he's Jesus. He's going to go to the cross. He's going to die so that the brokenness becomes whole. But they haven't quite grasped Messiah, God, Jesus, all the same circle. Okay, it's not like there's a Venn diagram here where it kind of overlaps. This is the same circle. And it's one of those things where they're going, but the rest of us are doing this. Why are you different? And the answer is because he's very different. Behold, the Lord your God is one. He is unique, categorically. That's from the Shema in the Old Testament. I just like saying Shema, so there you go. But on the text, Jesus replies to them, while the bridegroom is with them, the attendants of the bridegroom can't fast, can they? So long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot. He asked a rhetorical question, and because there are people like me who don't understand rhetorical questions, he answers it. I really don't understand rhetorical questions. I struggle with them. If you ask me one, just know that I might answer it. And by might, I mean I'm probably going to answer it. Because why would you ask a question that you didn't want me to answer? I'll have to leave that story for later. But Jesus' question here to them is, if you go to a wedding feast, you don't mourn and cry in a sad way while the wedding's going on. You go to the feast and you party it up because it's a great time of rejoicing. You're excited about it, right? Now, I'm sure that somebody's going to, I remember when so-and-so got married, everybody was so sad. Okay, that's not what we're talking about here. Okay, generally speaking, think Valentine's Day, you know, obligatory love your wife day, or your spouse day, depending on which side of the aisle you're on. But in the course of things, you know, because girls, you should buy your husband flower. Don't actually know. Anyway, buy him a new power drill. That'd be great. Yeah, okay, good. I am like the Lorax, I speak for the trees. But in the course of things, back to the text. In the course, what Jesus is saying is, look, this is the time for celebration. I'm here. You've been praying because you don't just go without food. You spend the time going that you would at the meal table, at the prayer table. Like, it's supposed to be that kind of tit for tat. So he's saying, look, you've been praying for this. You've been praying for the answer. I'm here to make it right. This is not the time to mourn. This is the time to celebrate. My disciples get it. Kind of. Gotta put the little asterisk, see the footnote. They'll get it later. But here Jesus is saying, I am what you've been waiting for. This is where it gets good. And they go, huh? Right? Because Jesus will go on from here, after he has explained to them, this is the part where we celebrate that the solution is here. But, there's always a but. But in this particular case, this is where it becomes important to link what will come and what has come in the text. But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. The takeaway here is not just simply, they'll escort him out of the room. It is the take by force. They're going to come with pitchforks and torches. He's going to be physically wrested away. It is a good word picture word. And what Jesus is saying is that's when they'll be upset. That's when they will fast. Right now, they have the solution. And they'll fast when that solution is wrenched from them and hung on the cross. That will break them. They will mourn over that. And that will make them sad. That will make them go, God, we live in a broken world. Now they're going to come out of it. And there are some who ascribe that this is why the church in the first century would fast on Fridays. That's somewhat true, but that's not exactly what Jesus is meaning. It was one of the ways in which it got interpreted. and they would use it that way. That's why you would have nobody eating meat on Fridays, generally in the first century Christian world, until the fishermen complained about it. And they built the case of Peter, James, John, Andrew, and then they decided you could eat fish on Friday. So that's a little cultural history jaunt, and I'll keep it short. But in the course of things, what Jesus is saying is right now they don't have a reason to mourn because I'm here. But I'm going to not be here because y'all are going to arrest me soon. It's not going to be too long before you come to the garden where I'm praying and drag me to the courts. Then they're going to have something to be broken about. But right now, they don't have anything to be broken about because we're in the middle of the celebration. We're in the middle of the good times. Why are we going to then lament about the bad that has and will occur? But that's not how this works. And that then brings us to his two other examples. These are transitional examples that are not meant to say really much about the Old Testament in that way at all. And this is what I mean. A lot of times when you read through some commentaries or you listen to certain people, like that Andy Stanley guy, they will talk about unhitching, that is his phrase. The church must unhitch from the Old Testament. And what he means by that is it's fine history, but it doesn't have any bearing on what we do in the New Testament. That is not what Jesus is getting at here at all, or anywhere else. That is a really bad view of the Old Testament, and in case I have not beaten that dead horse to death over the 6 years I've been here, just hold on, we'll get there. I promise I will revisit that because that's a thing for me. You cannot understand the New Testament unless you understand the Old Testament. Amen. Right? You can't have new if you don't have old. Okay. Just so we're clear, these two things are more alike than they are different. But in the course of this, what Jesus is getting at, and one of the things that he is getting at of the old and the new patch, is that in the old first century world, if you got a hole in your pants, it was not fashionable, so you would sew a patch on it. But you would go down to the rag store. Rags R Us, and they would sell just like you could go to Joann's or Michael's or whatever fabric store there is, and you would be able to acquire like a roll of fabric. You could acquire some fabric that way, and you would just sew onto and fix your hole, like patches today. But if you got one that was new material eventually shrinks down. This is why our jeans don't fit, right? That's what I'm going to go with anyways. It just shrinks in the wash. So, and this is Jesus's point is that if you put something new on the something old, then when it shrinks up, it's going to pull not just on the two spots where it's ripped, but it's going to pull on all of that and just rip off a bigger piece until finally you ain't got nothing left. And the new and old wineskins, when you put new wine into, they would sew up different animals' intestines and keep their wine in that. That sounds appetizing, right? Yeah. Anyways, but as it would ferment and as it would age, it lets off gas. Well, if you have a newly acquired wineskin from whatever part of the animal you're using, blenders are not out of the question, then it would be able to expand and let the gas do what the gas does. And as long as you left, the expansion part. If you fill it all the way up, it's going to get messy no matter what. But if you took an old one, you empty one out, and you decide, we're going to reuse the wine bottle, I'm using bottle kind of loosely here, then when you put the new wine in, it doesn't have the same elasticity, I'm surprised I said that word right, and it would explode guaranteed, and you would just waste everything. And Jesus' point here is not, that's Old Testament stuff. Unhitched from that. His point is, look, what you're mourning is the old. I am the solution to that problem. You don't need to cry out to God for this. I am the solution. His point is that I am the answer. It is not, don't fast. It's not the Old Testament. Because what is one of the things that we just looked at, he said is, we're not doing it right now, but we're going to do it later. And if he's saying get rid of the Old Testament, then that gets really awkward when he says, but we're going to do it again later. Make up your mind. And that's the problem. And this is why we need to understand what he's saying is right now, they have the answer to the problem. Right now, they're looking at what do we do about the fact that we are in a broken world? We look to Jesus. We cry out for God to send Emmanuel and the Messiah to us, and Jesus says, ta-da! I am Emmanuel. I am God with you in the most literal way possible. I am the one who is going to rescue you from the oppressive kingdom. It's not the kingdom you think. It's not Rome. It's not the Babylonians. It's the kingdom of death, hell, and the grave. I have the solution to that. I'm your rescuer. This is not the time we mourn. This is the time we celebrate that Jesus is the answer. So that is why Jesus says, you don't put old stuff on new. You don't put new stuff in old. Because his point is not get rid of the Old Testament. His point is, I'm the answer of what all of that stuff points to. I'm the solution to the problem that we see in the Old Testament, that as long as the law is external, you'll never get it right. As long as this is about just following rules and regulations, you'll never get it right. But when it's, you get a heart made of actual flesh, and the law gets put on that heart of actual flesh, then you get to keep it. Then you can follow God. You actually get righteousness in this deal. And this is what we're celebrating. This is what Jesus answers with, and I'm just willing to bet that they look and go, we don't get it. Right? This is the problem. Who is Jesus? In all 5 of these stories, the identity of Jesus is what is being questioned, either intentionally or not. I don't think that these people necessarily were coming up and saying, we don't like who you are, Jesus. I think they're coming to Jesus genuinely, we don't get you. You're weird. And I think, honestly, if we were to get in Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine, we would look at Jesus and go, yeah, you're weird. I mean, we have hindsight. We know that you're the right kind of weird. But he doesn't fit what we thought we would find. And this is their point. Jesus, you're not doing what pious religious people do. And Jesus says, because I'm the answer. I'm what pious religious people have been waiting for. When you pray and fast, you're praying and fasting that I would show up. Ta-da! But there's going to come a day in which I'm going to get taken away. Then you'll mourn again. We lament. I know we call it Good Friday, but I still struggle with calling it Good Friday. Right? I think I've made this statement every year. Like, it's only good in retrospect. The Friday is not good. Sunday makes Friday good. But without Sunday, Friday is a horrible, no good, dirty, rotten day. To quote a children's book. I just realized I did that, sorry. But this is what Jesus is getting at. Jesus is getting at, look, now is the time for celebration. And for us, we still live in that, this is the time for celebration. We know the answer. Are we still sad sometimes? Absolutely. Are we still at times broken? Absolutely. But we know the answer. When we fast on this side of the cross, we're not fasting saying, oh, Jesus, please solve the problem. We are praying, God, we've got another problem, and we know that you solved it. We just don't know how. We know Jesus is the answer, but how is Jesus the answer here? Because we're pretty desperate. And Jesus goes, well, I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked. Let me answer that for you. And that's the beauty of this passage, is that we get to see that Jesus is very clearly saying, I am the answer to the brokenness. So as we encounter broken people this week, Jesus is the answer. When we encounter people who are overwhelmed this week, Jesus is the answer. We can come alongside them in their moments of hurting, and we should, and I hope we do. But ultimately, it is about, do we take them to Jesus, who is the solution, Or are we just putting Band-Aids on, really deep mortal wounds? That's the difference. And Jesus is saying, look, I am what you're waiting for. You're doing it well. You just don't realize I'm your answer yet. I'm the answer. And that's what Jesus answers. Why aren't you broken? Why aren't your disciples broken? And he answers, because I'm the fixer of the broken. And it's a beautiful thing. And it fits so beautifully in Mark's overarching theme of, are you overwhelmed? God has a place for you. Have you gotten it wrong because you were overwhelmed? God still has a place for you. That's the beauty of Mark's gospel. That's the beauty of what we have here. And Father God, we thank you very much